Welcome, congregation members, students, clergy, faculty, administrators, staff, friends of PLU, and family. I'm delighted to welcome you this afternoon to the 11th Annual Lutheran Studies Conference. As Kendall said, my name is Dr. Marit Trelstad, and I am a professor of religion here at PLU and the University Chair of Lutheran Studies. Each fall, we offer this conference that connects the gifts of Lutheran higher education to the pressing issues of our time. And over the years, it's grown into this kind of beautiful space for reflection with hundreds of students and faculty, staff, congregation, and community members. And at the very start of the conference, I want to extend my thank yous to all the people who support this conference, the donors of the Lutheran Studies Chair at PLU, Pastor Jen Rude, Kendall Jeske, Director of Congregational Engagement, Mary Duvall in Advancement, Julie Winters, the wizard in Marketing and Communications who works with us weekends, nights, all times, Travis Pagel, and John Stroitzenberger in PLU IT, and campus events staff and the religion department at PLU. All of these people are completely crucial to setting the scene for this rich day of conversation. Give me 1 minute and I'm gonna share my screen here with you all. This year's Lutheran Studies Conference focuses on finding love and hope in the wake of the pandemic, and will address different forms of trauma and loss we continue to face. Mortality, anxiety, illness, and grief are near, and we struggle to piece life together in new ways. A metaphor for this can be found in the ancient Japanese pottery art, kintsugi. This art form puts broken pottery back together with gold. With gold, a symbol of embracing flaws and imperfections. Beauty is possible even when things fall apart. We all live with mortality. We all live with brokenness. And this last year, we were reminded of this in spades. At the very start of the pandemic, my father died. It was a wrenching and holy time. And I won't forget waking up in the middle of the night at the hospital as my sister and I held a sacred and strange sleepover with Dad. My sister and I had gone to sleep talking quietly, and when I woke, it seemed unbelievably holy. It was dark, and the three of us were resting together. More than 3 times across the pandemic, my children, my spouse, and I gathered around the phone to sing, praise, pray, praise, and say goodbye to loved ones as they were dying, including family members and our dear neighborhood grandma who climbed the stairs well into her 80s to our front door, bringing cookies in a little tiny baggies to our children. With all the anxiety, uncertainness, and grief of the pandemic, there was a time in late winter when my spouse and I wondered aloud together, do you think we will ever really feel happy again? Or is this kind of low-level sorrow just a part of us from now on? The answer to that we've come to know is yes. Happiness and sorrow is the blend we all get. This realization came from an unusual place, perhaps. In the early 2021, I read a review that encouraged me to give a folk rock duo, the Banksons, 27 minutes of my time for their musical journey through the pandemic and losing a child by miscarriage in the middle of it all. The review claimed that the Banksons were, quote, the troubadours of the pandemic. I sat down to watch this piece titled My Joy is Heavy, not really knowing what to expect. By the end, my jaw was literally open in wonder. I have never heard anything quite like it. I actually rushed across the house and said, Bjorn, you've got to listen to this. I've just never heard anything like this. I re-listened to it several times over the next days, as well as one of their other songs, the Keep Going song. The Banksons' music moved me into a new freeing space, and it functioned as gospel to me. These 2 musical pieces by the Banksons had these messages for me. One, that none of us knew how hard the pandemic was going to be on ourselves, our families, and our communities. Two, that some life-giving connection was possible even over Zoom. And Deanna Thompson, our keynote speaker this evening, has written on that topic. And three, that even with grief and loss, you get to keep the love. And four, that brokenness can be embraced and live alongside joy. Indeed, that one can carry a heavy joy that holds grief, rage, sorrow, joy, and love all in one place. My joy is heavy has parts that are quiet and dark and others that are almost scream sung with exuberance. There they are dancing and singing in their pajamas and sweatpants, which they call their COVID uniform, in their perfectly messy house, sharing their grief and joy with this wild openness that almost embarrasses me, being a child born of a Nordic Lutheran family. The song has these lines. These songs have these lines. My joy is heavy. Help me carry the joy that comes at the end of a life, at the end of a walking, at the very beginning, this heavy joy that I marry and I delight. It makes me want to sing thank you, hallelujah. No, I'm not trying. No, I am long past trying to mend this broken heart. No, I am just trying to hold all the pieces and honor every part. The song holds that we are our lives are a holy mess. Brokenness is just the way we walk in the world. Just having this named or actually scream sung out loud allowed me to move into a new space. I would offer that this piece is a modern lament, mixing praise and rage, gratitude and despair. From their home studio, the Banksons offer accompaniment through the valley of the shadow of death. But here's why I say it wasn't unusual that my breakthrough would come through this folk rock duo. Their message that they sing is one I have known since the cradle. Like the philosophy behind Japanese kintsugi pottery, my Lutheran tradition claims that we're all imperfect and deeply flawed, that we're broken and yet live in love. Martin Luther claimed that God comes to us in many places, including the places of our lives when we are in despair, anxiety, and darkness. The cross speaks of God's holiness and holy presence in death and suffering. Of course, love, joy, and deep sadness and brokenness live together. In one book, Gist, The Essence of Raising Life-Ready Kids, they propose 12 things every child needs to know by the time they hit 20 years old. Number one, which they claim is the most important, is life is difficult. The authors, Michael Anderson and Timothy Johnson, muse about when we started culturally to expect life to be easy. Life has always been difficult, they claim. People used to have more children, assuming that many would not make it to adulthood. People were a part of illness and dying in a way that pre-COVID, some of us may have been able to relegate to the sidelines of living. And these authors discuss how at some point, rather recently, our society started to think that ease was normal and difficulty is unusual and surprising, but this is not the case. Learning how to live fully along with difficulty and challenge and loss is the gist of living. Atul Gawande's best-selling 2017 book, Being Mortal, Medicine and What Matters in the End, is another book that goes straight to the heart of our topic today. It addresses meaning and purpose, especially at the end of our lives. I almost stole the title of his book for this conference, but then out of respect, changed it to Living with Mortality. Gawande mentions that we fear discussions about death, and even medical providers are trained to offer medical solutions rather than talk through the worst possibilities. He offers a series of wonderful questions that help hone in on the most important things for a particular person and their family when facing dying and death. Everyone has different desires and priorities that can shape their final days if they're given time to reflect and make choices on this. And maybe it is not finding yet another cure, or maybe it is. Maybe it's simply being at home or with family or to be comfortable. Paradoxically, this book, Being Mortal, was one of the most life-affirming books that I had read in a very long time. We need help talking about mortality. This afternoon, Mark Mulder, Dean of the School of Business here at PLU, will be talking about end-of-life decisions and how we can do better as a society in addressing this very important topic. From another angle, my friend and local chaplain, Jenny Rake Morona, wrote an article for a journal that proposed that dying is actually a stage of life, a stage of profound growth. This, of course, does not change the difficulty and grief. From a secular perspective, philosopher of religion John Caputo wrote a recent book titled Cross and Cosmos, an unusual title perhaps for a secular person, an atheist. And he even calls it a theology, also interesting. In here, he urges us to dive deep into the world's suffering, to go all the way down and to see the world lay bare in its suffering and unavoidable dying, to even follow the universe to the ultimate lights out as it implodes and calls it a day. What's the meaning in that? In the silence after the cacophony, Caputo says a theologian worthy of the name does not fill in a cheap answer. She does not call a thing what it is not. They do not say that all is saved eternally or that death is just an illusion. Death is no trick. Caputo, not a Christian or theist, writes that there's no wizard behind the curtain that will swoop in to change the meaning or ending of the story. But Caputo engages the cross at the place where we actually let go of our meaning making. And if we do that, we stand a chance. Not to change the end of the story, but to arrive at a simple place of gratitude and commitment to life. Caputo pushes past Luther's theology of the cross, past suffering and the death of God, to resurrect a sense of the ordinary or the extraordinary ordinary without a trace of the transcendent. There's a line from the Jim Jarmusch film, Down by Law, delivered by Roberto Benigni, and then Tom Waits, that describes the summation of Caputo's vision well. It's a sad and beautiful world, Benigni says. Yeah, pal, Waits responds, it's a sad and beautiful world. With greater eloquence, Caputo includes a quote from the short famous book, The Little Prince. Quote, once there was a lovely place far, far away where the sun would rise and set and roses bloomed and then it all disappeared forever. I think that it's very sad, but also very beautiful. And that when we come to the end of this story, we should applaud. We should clap our hands and shout, hooray. Yes, yes, hurrah. Caputo captures some part of Luther's heart well. While some theologians favor neat, rational answers or stories of victory and power, Martin Luther's own mystical background and experience drove him to embrace the nonsense, the deep, dark, the pain and vulnerability that has no logic. From another angle in her book, Glimpsing Resurrection, Cancer, Trauma, and Ministry, Deanna Thompson, who's with us today and tonight, embraces the space and the insights of Holy Saturday, the time between Good Friday and Easter, where darkness, uncertainty, doubt, and fear are part of the holy journey. It is actually the longest time in the Holy Week's events. We can hold vigil together and talk in this darkness, meeting the holy in the not yet resurrection space where tidy resolution, healing, and hope is not yet filled. Both Thompson and Caputo call for a pause, an acknowledgement of suffering exactly as it is, a la Martin Luther's theology of the cross, but from different perspectives. Where for Caputo, it's essential to release the need for meaning making and to know that there's no resolution at the end of it all. But for Thompson, there's also space. Agreed, yes, we need to make space, but there's also this space, a Holy Saturday, between the cross and resurrection, and hope in the promises of God for an afterlife. I would add that Luther also offers that one knows and encounters what's holy through the most basic actions, changing diapers or cradling a child, through physical intimacy, in eating and drinking, in the sunshine, in communion and baptism, and hearing the word. At one point, he says that you and I, the sun and the moon, are all words of God. But today, we're discussing a theology that starts at the foot of the cross and on Holy Saturday. So let me join you at the foot of the cross. What is the meaning of the cross and Jesus' suffering or our own? Elsewhere, I've argued that the cross is actually the opposite of God's covenantal love. It's not the site of salvation, but its opposite. Salvation is the love that remains and lives despite the crosses of the world. But learning and thinking alongside Caputo and Thompson, let me offer another image of the holy experienced in suffering in the Holy Saturday spaces of our world. Instead of focusing on Christ's suffering, however, my gaze turns to those who keep company with the dead, the women at the foot of the cross. This is invoked in the art of the cover of my book, Cross Examinations. The women are the bearers of salvation. They stay with Jesus during his journey of suffering. They stay with him as he dies. They tend to him even after he is dead, as they go to the tomb, intending to rub oils into his skin. They are the bearers of salvation between Holy Week and Easter. They enact it in extremely tangible ways, accompanying, grieving, and caring for the body of their loved one. The site of salvation here is in the hands of the women. The October 2020 edition of National Geographic featured another angle on the women of the cross, most of them intentionally evoking Michelangelo's Pieta. Oddly, National Geographic didn't even note that. While the boys and men in each of these images are alive, important to note, the women's gaze and the hold on their sons evidence a fierce hold on life and love. Like the women who danced with their disappeared husbands and sons in Argentina decades ago, these images demand accountability for injustice, debasement, and killing. They are claiming, attending, and holding their dead. Love is the start of justice. During my father's dying, my cousin, my sister, and I took shifts. We rubbed lotion into his feet, we held his hands, we sang and prayed. At an unexpected time, when it was just the two of us, he suddenly opened his eyes. Just once out of the 4 days and nights I was there with him. We talked briefly about how sorry we were that things had gotten so hopeless. We talked about his childhood toys. It was an utterly simple conversation. Dad, I love you. I love you too. We shared those words as we looked at each other with the same blue eyes and resigned smiles. And I actually mean we do have the same blue eyes because Apple can't tell my face and my 89-year-old father's face apart. I would offer that the I love you is actually the holy reality that's the thread through the joy and suffering, a ridiculously simple foundation of all apophatic meaning. The I love you is what we utter in mystery, apology, shame, suffering, death, and wonder. We say it with simple actions in the everyday. We feed, bathe, laugh, call, walk together, and long to hold hands. The Bible affirms that God is love, and this speaks to us, to a different type of reality altogether. It's the truth of art and poetry, and as theologian Catherine Keller says, the possible. The I love you is all that is left or needed when life is at its barest. Does love remain after the world passes away? I'm not sure I care at times. John Caputo, an atheist that I mentioned, emphatically upholds the idea that nothing remains after this world and life. It is possible that for myself as a theist, just the I love you echoing through the universe may be enough. If there is nothing after this world, it's sure enough for now. Nonetheless, I highly appreciate that Thompson says that progressive theologies must say something more than nothing about the hope and afterlife. Her own response of focusing on the promises of God in hope is certainly in line with Martin Luther, who advocated clinging to the grace and promises of God in facing death. In another book, Why Christian?, Canadian theologian Douglas John Hall writes with this kind of simple clarity. He says, what happens after we die? I don't know. But he continues, I just love that he has the line, I don't know, in his big book of theology. But he continues to clarify that this really is not a matter of knowledge, but of faith. trust, and belief. He quotes the Bible in Psalm 27. I believe that I shall see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. He says he holds to hope in this world and the next, and that is all the knowledge that he needs. Years ago, our religion department lost a precious colleague to cancer. I want to invoke the name and spirit of Dr. Kathy Brazil into our room here, in all her Louisiana Mardi Gras earth-loving ways. And this conference is also, it's in her honor and in honor of all the people that we've lost around the world in these years of pandemic. It's also in profound gratitude for our medical providers who, like the women of the cross, deliver care and grace for our loved ones, accompanying them through their dying. There are very few places in our society that provide space to talk about grief, lament, death, loss, and mortality. And even fewer help put these into a language of faith that allow for despair and hope simultaneously. So this Lutheran Studies Conference is offered to you, good people, in hopes that it speaks some good words into places of difficulty in our lives. May these words in our time across the day be a blessing as we live in our brokenness. Thank you very much. We will take a short break and then we'll begin with our wonderful panel at 12:45 at the bedside of COVID. Thank you.